Great. Hi, everybody. Thank you very much. We just wanted to give you a brief overview of how we got to today's webinar through the Coalition for Action on Childhood Obesity. And then I'll give a little brief summary of the context in Canada in the past that led everybody to start to address this setting, and then talk to you about the BC initiative. So first of all, we are in the second phase of our coalition work, which is funded by the Coalitions Linking Action and Science for the Prevention of Cancer, CPAC. And our coalition came together really aiming to leverage existing evidence-based activities underway in Canada to create a comprehensive obesity prevention strategy, similar to those used to reduce tobacco. We based our work on the socio-ecological model and a framework from Robert Woods Johnson Foundation. You can see here on the next slide that our TACO 1 and 2 partners, there's different shading, but we started out with the BC, Northwest Territories, Ontario, and Quebec, and then during phase 2, we have added New Brunswick as a partner and the Yukon. So when we look at what we tried to do with TACO 1 is we really looked at focusing on sugary drinks, screen time, and access to healthy food. And the key initiatives we got involved with in Ontario was land-based food procurement in rural, remote Aboriginal communities. And then in the schools, we developed and contextualized SIP-SMART for across jurisdictions and developed ScreenSmart and contextualized it. And then we focused a lot on some knowledge translation, knowledge exchange initiatives related to policies, advertising to children, taxation of sugary drinks, and local school food zoning. So as we've moved into the second phase, one of the key aspects of the phase 2 class grants were to broaden the reach of existing initiatives and deepen the impact. And so we added 2 province territories and 7 new First Nation community partners. And to deepen the impact, we looked at primarily a lot of work that was going on in the Aboriginal communities in Ontario, and then a lot of our work was based in the schools. So to deepen the impact with children and their families, we aimed to target additional settings where children and families are living, learning, and playing, basically. So we had an initiative to focus on early learning and childcare and the community recreation setting. So I just have a brief overview of our slide from our class project, the Early Learning School and Recreation, and you'll see that the red circles the healthy food and beverage sales in recreation facilities, and that's what we're here to talk to you about today. So moving really to the context for action on healthy food and beverage in municipal recreation and sport environments, because sport happens there. It started, there's a little bit of activity starting way back in 2006, and in British Columbia, we received a small amount of internal SSHRC funding to conduct a provincial audit, and in partnership with the BC Recreation and Parks Association, we sent out a really massive survey to assess the current state of food environments in recreation and their needs for offering healthy choices. Out of 373 BCRPA registered facilities, we got about a 31% response rate. And this was a big survey in that they had to go out and audit every vending machine as well in the survey. So we count ourselves lucky that we got that response rate. Following that, we did a focus group in 7 different communities. I'm going to show you some of the results from that, but I want to emphasize that there was also some work done at the same time coming up with similar findings by Chaumet et al. In Quebec City, where they surveyed what was going on. And when we went out to develop this instrument, we went and consulted with a bunch of recreation stakeholders about what the food environment looked like. And so you see here the model that we surveyed along. We looked at some food security. We looked at food services, which were the concessions or cafes and catering. We looked at vending, programming for children, youth, and adults, fundraising, because sport groups tend to fundraise in the facilities they're doing their sports in, staff, and related to the work site, then events like Canada Day fair out on your parking lot of the rec center, and then the education awareness activities that these rec centers are normally involved in. So that's the operating model for food in recreation. It's way beyond vending and food services. So what did we find from our survey? We found that, basically 3/4 of recreation facilities surveyed had food and beverage contracts, that in vending, the average number of machines was around 2, but you can see, depending on the size of the facility, it could be 12 beverage machines. The average number of snack machines per facility was around 4, but that ranged from 0 to 19 in some of these large urban municipal multiplexes. When we looked at what they're serving, and this is before we got into our guidelines and profiling, you can see that basically almost 60% were sugary beverages, some people call them that, or sugar sweetened. So the vending profile for beverage items was poor. And then when we look at our snack machines, it was even worse, with over 60% being chocolate bars. If you could change the slide, Bill, that would be great. And bags of chips. So then if you add pretzels and some of the nuts and trail mixes, there's almost all of it was what we call junk food. Worse yet, in the concessions, we did find some barriers. Budget was the number one barrier to providing healthy foods. When we looked at pricing, sometimes vending materials that were healthier were priced the same because they were smaller, but in concession, the healthier products were priced higher. Most concessions were open when children were likely to be there, and when fundraising events, hot dogs and pops were the most popular items sold. So we have a picture. Basically, we have rec facilities that are set in our communities to promote health, and ironically, they're promoting physical activity, sport, and wellness, but selling hot dogs, French fries, chocolate bars, candy, chips, and pop. So that was the situation then. And then we also asked about policies, and at that time, most facilities did not have any policies in place, and those that did were governing allergic, like peanut and nut exposure policies around children and youth programs. There were 2 facilities in all of our 31% responses that indicated they were developing policies, and 91% at that time did not have a committee to deal with healthy eating issues. But luckily enough, when we went out and talked to the 7 facilities in different communities around British Columbia, from small rural facilities, staff in those facilities, to large urban, everybody was very happy and engaged in this issue. They felt that offering healthy choices was a chance to make a difference in the health and well-being of the community. There was a belief that in a community setting with publicly funded resources, people should have an opportunity to support their health. That the action on healthy food and beverage aligned with the values of the institutions. Then, as we're moving through, the government guidelines were starting to be enacted in the school and in the recreation or public buildings area, and that we're starting to get feedback from the public, complaints on their complaints saying, it's just junk that I can have here. I want to see healthy food in my facility. So that was where we started to have energy in British Columbia, and I think everywhere across the country. Now in 2014, the landscape has significantly changed, and you'll see here a map. During the KCO 2 project, we've been getting out and talking to other jurisdictions to see where they are. We're aware of a couple of policies that have been enacted. So you see on this legend that we have a number of partners that have guidelines in place that guide vending in rec centers, at least vending and sometimes food services. And then you see Nova Scotia's just coming out with their guideline and has a capacity building initiative. British Columbia, we have a guideline and a capacity building initiative. Alberta. And then you see the capacity building in the Yukon and the Northwest Territories through KCO. We're aware there's been a significant initiative in the north of Manitoba. And in Quebec, they're starting with the KCO project, and I know in Quebec City that they had done some work. And in Ontario, stakeholders are discussing. This is not meant to be the final version. If you're on the call and you know of what's going on in your jurisdiction, there are small areas like in Saskatchewan. I know that there's some arena work going on there. So anyways, it's changed. There's a lot of interest across the country. So that's where we come to this webinar, which is sponsored really by our CLASS project, but meant to highlight the work that's been done across the country, starting with today's presentation of the evidence for what happens when we do take action in these, and then moving to, in 2 weeks' time, looking at the real-world stories from people that are taking action and trying to take this on in their community. So having